Okay, Pokemon Masters, this video is just a very quick ramble. It is, of course, about something very, very post-game, so if you've clicked on this video about Paradox Pokemon and you're still like, oh, I don't want spoilers for Scarlet and Violet, click away. I have plenty of other videos for you to watch. Maybe you want to click the link at the top of the description to check out my new poster for the Tree of Evolution, which will feature all of the new Paradox Pokemon on there, because these Pokemon are relatives of other existing Pokemon. The game is pretty explicit about where these Pokemon have come from, and I can tell you where they're going. They're going onto this tree as soon as humanly possible. In fact, the poster might even be done by the time you're watching this video. Click the link at the top of the description to get in your pre-order, or to get in your order now, and it will be delivered to you as soon as possible. Time is of the essence, and when it comes to the theme of time, having past and future Pokemon, this is something we wanted for a long time. In fact, we've seen it growing and growing in the community, with the Hisuian forms effectively being past versions, past variants of existing Pokemon. People have wanted to see what Pokemon would have looked like millions of years ago, which is what we see in the fossil Pokemon, and we're intrigued about when science innovates on Pokemon with like Genesect and Mewtwo creating powerful abominations. This idea of the past and future clashing has led to the idea of a Pokemon past and Pokemon future version, which Scarlet and Violet effectively are. But in my mind, in my brain, and this is why this is just a little ramble and more of an emotion-based thing, I think, but I think I have good logic behind it, the past forms are just cooler than the future forms. Let me know if you disagree in the comments here, but I think the past forms of Pokemon, like these idea of ancient Pokemon, are so much cooler than the future Pokemon, and here's why. Number one, first of all, we know that there was a past to the Pokemon world. There is an evolutionary tree of life. We learn about it through Pokedex entries. We learn about it through the fossil record and seeing fossil Pokemon. So when we see Pokemon of the ancient past, as described by Arven to be filled with primal power, which we know back in the day there was lots of primal energy when primal reversion was possible in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, it's intriguing. What did the Pokemon look like back then? Filled up with this energy. What did they look like at a time when they were untamed generally by Pokemon trainers? Some would think that they would take on the form of Mega Evolution, and we can see in Salamence it's exactly that, because Mega Evolution and Primal Reversion uses the same infinity energy. And what do you know, with Paradox Salamence, otherwise known as Roaring Moon, we see a Pokemon that takes that same shape on. It seems that Mega Evolution isn't too far off. The lore is really interesting. What did the ancient past look like? What were these Pokemon to people? How did people see just regular Pokemon like a Donphan? Was it a legendary to them? How do we end up with stories about Volcarona replacing the sun when in the ancient past it looked like this? There are lots of questions that come up, and there is so much variety in the way these Pokemon can look. Who would have thought? Who would have ever thought, oh yeah, ancient Jigglypuff looks kind of like a vampire with the Mega Mewtwo quiff thing? No one was thinking that that's what ancient Jigglypuff looked like. So it's interesting. So what's the problem when it comes to future Pokemon? Surely you just do that in reverse. Surely it's more interesting. Where are we going? What does the future of the Pokemon world look like? Well, all of the designs of the future Pokemon, the future Paradox forms, have become a little, unified, shall we say. It was always kind of odd to me that Miraidon had technological LCD screen eyes, as if the Pokemon has been built, not grown. And that's okay, we've seen kind of digitized Pokemon before. They exist on and off as individual gimmicks with like Porygon Z and like Genesect, for example. But I mentioned with Mewtwo, Mewtwo is the result of scientific engineering of a Pokemon. I also mentioned in a recent video that from the perspective of a Aurorus, for example, a Meganium looks pretty futuristic, probably existing millions of years after Aurorus, or heck, Tropius even. There is a lineage between these three Pokemon, and to one of them, relative to them, one is the future Pokemon. Or maybe for a less prehistoric, generally looking example, think about like Kleavor to Scyther to Scizor. Scizor, yeah, it's covered in metal, and it's kind of futuristic compared to like Scyther or Kleavor, but there's a clear progression between those Pokemon. But when we look at all the new Paradox forms of these various Pokemon, what do we notice? They're all robots. What happens to the Tree of Evolution? It becomes all technology. Are these Pokemon that we're seeing here, this Paradox Gallade Gardevoir or the Paradox Volcarona, are these Pokemon actual organic life anymore, or are they just code inside robotic machines? That's what the designs would have you imply. All of the designs of these Pokemon are unified, like Pokemon meets Cybermen from Doctor Who, whereas all of the designs of the ancient prehistoric Pokemon are diverse. They show a range of where Pokemon have come from and what they could have been. But this depicts a single bleak future for the Pokemon world, one in which organic life dies out and all Pokemon life becomes shelled within technology. And maybe for some people that's really cool. And in fact, maybe even in the real world, that's something you're after. I quite like the idea of technology as our exoskeleton that allows us to do more and become more than we can be based on our biological constraints. But when you see the future looking like Cybermen or these AI Pokemon that are just encased and they all have the exact same eyes, you can't help but feel the death of mysticism and wonder. I can't remember where I heard this, where this quote is from. It might be a philosopher, it might be an author, and you'll have to forgive me. And yes, I have Google here, but I can't even find it, so I must be misquoting it. But there's a quote that's something to the effect of, on the journey from human to God, first we must become machine. The idea that the singularity is inevitable and that we will all become AI constructs before we become something more. And like, yeah, that's cool and everything, but also a little bit kind of spooky and a little bit, I think there's a lot of beauty in the diversification of life. And these ancient Pokemon don't show anything less powerful. In fact, they show creatures from a time when Pokemon didn't just sit in Pokeballs and weren't used by people, but were literal living deities themselves. I personally think past Pokemon are so much more interesting, and that's why. And while don't get me wrong, I think some of the designs are really cool. Future Volcarona and Future Gallade Gardevoir are pretty sick, and I do like them. And as one-offs, I could really enjoy these. The idea that this is the future for all Pokemon makes me want to look back into the past a lot more than it does the future of the Pokemon world. That's just what I'm thinking. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments down below. And while you're heading down there, click the link on the way down, because on the journey from video to comment section, you must click that link. Head on over to my merch store and pick up the new Pokemon Tree of Evolution poster. It is finally nearly done, maybe. Planning to ship as soon as I can in December to try to get them to you before the holidays. Thank you all for watching, and of course, soar high, Pokemon Masters.
This is Ash Ketchum. You just watched a video by Birdkeeper Toby. That makes you a Pokemon Master.
A tremendous thank you to those of you who've been supporting this channel year-round on Patreon, but a special thank you to the big patrons of this month, Michael Hornschuch, the Alligator, Jedruben, and Anthony Lee. Thank you.